So welcome to a very special episode of Endoscopy Essentials. It's all about artificial intelligence, AI in colonoscopy. And you might think, oh, not that again, but we have a lot of studies, randomized studies, we have a lot of meta-analysis, and now we are going to the guideline level, and something very exciting is happening. And I warmly welcome Michael Bretthauer as a co-host. Michael has done a few in the past. He will be more involved in the future. So Michael, you take over and I ask some questions in between. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's exciting to be here. Yeah, so I think this is a very special episode we are doing. It's about artificial intelligence, namely CAD-E in colonoscopy, a topic which is interesting for a lot of people.
CAD-E is computer-assisted diagnosis.
Computer-aided detection. I think
right.
it's yes, but it's about finding polyps. It's those boxes that we have on the screen when we do colonoscopies. The occasion for this podcast today is that new guidelines are just published. And I'm very excited about this new guideline project because for the first time, at least in the field of gastroenterology endoscopy, but I think also quite unique for the whole of medicine, three big organizations have come together and worked on a guideline project together and here for AI in colonoscopy. And we have a very illustrious panel here with us today. Per Olav Vandvik, who is a professor here at the University of Oslo and the founder of what is called the MAGIC Foundation. They do guidelines in medicine for a living. They're very good at it. They're working together with the British Medical Journal, the BMJ. They are the mothership of this project, together with Farid Foroutan from McMaster University and also the MAGIC Foundation. Farid and Per have been putting this together from the BMJ side. And then the AGA, the American Gastroenterology Association, represented here by Shahnaz Sultan, welcome Shahnaz, has taken this and looked at the evidence and made their own guidelines, which are also published now. And the ESGE, here represented by its president, Ian Gralnick, welcome Ian, have done the same thing. So we have the BMJ people who are the best in the world, I think, in medical guideline making. They develop all the results, all the evidence from everything which is out there. And they have looked at it, and they have thought about it and made up their mind. And then the AGA and the ESGE has also done that.
So wait a bit, there's just one data collection, one systematic review, whatever. There's a common database for everybody to interpret. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's unique.
I think so, but I can give the word to the people who really know this. Per, would you like to explain what is it you have been doing with this?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. So this is also a very special guideline from the MAGIC Evidence Ecosystem Foundation. It's the first where we address the use of AI in clinical practice. And just a few words about MAGIC. We started 15 years ago to fix problems with guidelines. You know, we have very advanced standards to produce what is called trustworthy guidelines. We have advanced methods such as GRADE to assess the evidence and move from evidence to recommendations. MAGIC adds technology, so we have a platform to create and publish and even dynamically update recommendations. So this guideline from MAGIC would also be a living guideline. And we have a real focus on processes to be quicker following trials that could change practice to move from evidence to new recommendations. So that's the background for our project called the BMJ Rapid Recommendations that we started in 2016. It's our lab to improve guidelines, and we published 25 guidelines in the BMJ, but also in our platform MAGIC app, which makes it easier to adapt and reuse guidelines that are global at the national level. So after all these guidelines, we became part of what's called the OPERA project, this EU Horizon-funded project run from Michael's group here in Oslo. And while you're doing a large trial for CADX, or next step of this technology, we were asked to look at the evidence for CAD-E and then follow these standards and methods and processes using MAGIC app and to create a guideline answering the question of whether we should use or not use CAD-E in endoscopies. And it's been extremely exciting, just like you mentioned, because Shahnaz was actually invited as the clinical chair in our guideline, whereas Farid is the methods chair. We set up a panel of unconflicted experts. We're really strict on conflict of interest. So with the BMJ as a partner, we assess both financial conflicts and even intellectual conflicts, meaning that some of the people in your group, Michael, could not be part of this because we're involved in the trials. And a lot of people, gastroenterologists, had financial conflicts of interest related to the device companies. So we had an unconflicted panel of experts, gastroenterologists across the world, patient partners, chaired by Shahnaz and Farid. And then Shahnaz was chairing also the AGA guidelines. So she had the idea, we discussed early on, Shahnaz, that why wouldn't we do this together? So then we triggered the standard processes of doing a full systematic review of all the trials. Again, this is the most researched area of AI in medicine. So when we started, there were 22 trials. The latest update of the systematic review, published in Annals of Internal Medicine in October 2024, 44 trials, 22,000 patients. So there's also this opportunity to look at AI devices for use in clinical practice, using exactly the same standards and methods as we do for guidelines for other topics, such as other devices and drugs, and see if we could deal with AI evidence. And then we realized that when you gather a panel of experts and patient partners, you start with defining the question in what's called the PICO format, the clinical question to be addressed, which means defining the population, basically all sorts of people undergoing colonoscopy, from screening to symptomatic patients. The intervention was CAD-E compared to colonoscopy without CAD-E. And then we come to the patient-important outcomes. And whereas a lot of gastroenterologists rightly are interested in detecting polyps, what matters to patients is the incidence and mortality from colorectal cancer. And we know this because we published a previous rapid recommendation on screening. It was quite controversial, screening colonoscopies. So when you start focusing on patient-important outcomes, such as deaths and new cases of cancer, well, then that will have an impact on how we look at the evidence. Of course, all these trials look at the diagnostic test accuracy of
ADR, right?
ADR, and the normal detection rates of this technology, CAD-E. So we had to go to modeling and a quite innovative approach to model the outcomes, long-term outcomes of deaths and cases of cancer. And then we did the systematic review, we did the modeling study, it informed AGA guidelines, it informed ESGE guidelines. We follow these standards and methods, and we can come back to what the recommendations are, but it really shows the need to globally collaborate on evidence. When we move to even living evidence, so updating recommendations dynamically, as we have done with COVID in MAGIC together with WHO, then in those situations, it's even more important to collaborate globally on the evidence syntheses, at least. So it's a wonderful opportunity to talk about also some of the challenges in doing so.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work, Per. So how long has this been going on? I mean, when did you start all this?
So we started, Shaz and Farid, you need to remind me, but I think we started basically more than 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of innovation in this project, and when we are looking at modeling studies, we have to be really careful to get it right.
Of course.
That also added time in the peer review process of this paper. The microsimulation study will be published in BMJ, etc. So it's a lot of work. Another reason to collaborate globally, for sure.
So I think people will now be excited to hear what you found. And maybe, Farid, you can take the lead here and just give us the most important numbers. So how, and Per, you said that the organizations were interested, obviously, in the ADRs, but that's well known, I would say. At least our audience, they know that there's some increase in ADR. But then the patient-important outcomes, the cancer risk after colonoscopy. So what, with all the evidence, and then the innovative modeling that you did, and it took a long time, and you did that very, very carefully. Farid, what are the numbers? Where are we with regard to the effect, or the benefits, I should say, of CAD-E in colonoscopy, and are there harms that you have identified as well?
That's a great question, Michael. And first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. So as you noted, the ADR increase with the use of CADI is well known. It's about an 8% increase in the adenoma detection rate. But for us, the key element was to actually move beyond the endoscopy outcomes. And so from the modeling work that was done, we made the conclusion that actually for colorectal cancer incidence, we have almost no idea as to what's happening there. And the reason for that is because of all the different doubts and sources of uncertainty that are coming into the modeling work. The source of evidence had low to very low certainty with regards to the grade framework. That's the framework that we use to judge how certain we are and the conclusions that we draw from the body of the evidence. So for the cancer incidents, we're sort of throwing our hands up and saying we have actually no idea what's happening there. But for death from colorectal cancer, we were a little bit more certain. And we think that there may be a very slight reduction in death, but it's actually not a clinically important reduction where almost everybody would say that is super important and we want that reduction in mortality to be applied to us.
Wow.
And so if I actually were to put a number to it, it would be about 2 fewer deaths out of 10,000 patients who are followed for a 10-year period of time.
2 fewer deaths per 10,000 patients who have had a colonoscopy over 10 years. That's the effect of AI. And it's not, you say it's not clinically relevant. Well, that's interpretation, of course. But our listeners would like to know, was this statistically significant? We always talk about that when it comes to medical science.
Yeah, so we, from a guideline perspective, we don't tend to put too much emphasis on statistical significance, but for those who are interested, it was not statistically significant because if you look at the 95% confidence interval, and if we were to repeat this 100 times, 95 out of 100 times, the reduction in mortality could be anywhere from 10 fewer deaths out of 10,000 patients followed for 10 years, or 18 more deaths out of 10,000 patients followed for 10 years.
Wow. I think, Thomas, you have a comment, but let me first say, after this, I will call you up, Ian first for the ESGE, then Farid and Per for the BMJ, because you have also had your own panel. So you thought about, okay, what does this mean? And then at the end, Shazi for the AGA, because I would like to know, and our listeners would know, what does that mean? So what are the recommendations? And stay tuned because this is going to be very interesting. But Thomas, you first.
I just have a question to better understand it. Why is it relatively easier to model mortality rather than incidence? You said as a parameter, mortality was a little bit less shaky than incidence, where you didn't know anything.
It's a great question. So it's the nuances of the mechanism of the grade approach, which we used to rate how certain we are in the conclusions. So the modeling technique behind death or incidence of colorectal cancer were the same. The source of evidence going into the modeling of both of them were by and large the same. We took the effectiveness of CADI on adenoma detection rate to inform both outcomes of cancer incidence and cancer-related mortality. The conclusion, in essence, that we made for death was that there is no important reduction in death. And the major source of uncertainty for us was the, by and large, lack of not blinding that was being done in the randomized controlled trials done on CADI. That lack of blinding in general, when we look historically across other trials that haven't had blinding, they tend to overestimate the true treatment effect. And so when you have a source of bias that is tending towards overestimating the true effect, but yet we're still making the conclusion that there is no important effect, that actually doesn't impact our outcome or our conclusion rather, as much as it would for a conclusion where we would end up saying there is an important reduction. So I didn't give you a number for colorectal cancer incidence. It was actually 11 fewer out of 10,000 patients followed for 10 years. Our panel made the judgment that that could be conceived as an important reduction. And if we are going to make a conclusion that that could be conceived as an important reduction, well, the overestimation of the effect because of lack of blinding could be a source of uncertainty that would decrease how certain we are in that outcome. But because for mortality, we're saying there is no important reduction, the lack of blinding would have actually emphasized the true effect there. And despite that emphasis, we're still making the conclusion that there's no meaningful effect.
That makes sense, I think. Per, you have a comment?
No, I was just going to give that best estimate of effect on incidence that you just did, because that's the difference that the panel felt, and we'll come back to how we made the assumptions about what's important to patients, but felt that 11 fewer per 10,000 in 10 years could be important in terms of new cases of cancer. That could be discussed, but making that assumption meant that we had less certainty in that outcome.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm moving over to the ESGE, and you are the boss at ESGE, you are the president. The ESGE is part, or has been part of this, as I think, exciting collaboration. So what was your thinking, ESGE thinking? You took this on, what did you do, and what did you conclude? What does ESGE conclude?
Well, I mean, first of all, Michael and Thomas, thank you for inviting me to this, and I think you guys do a great job with Endoscopy Essentials, these podcasts that you put on. So, Michael, really, you came to me as me being the ESG president. I think it was late summer of 24 or early fall, and we discussed this. And at first, I was actually, as you remember, a little bit hesitant to do this. I thought about this further, and we discussed this again, and I said, well, if we're going to do this, it is probably something that our community, the endoscopy community, is something they would be interested in, as well as patients, of course. But I told you very clearly at that point, if we do this, we need to do this as unconflicted as we can.
Yes.
So when we put together this panel, BMJ, I think you guys at Magic really set the standard. We tried to achieve that, but we really did a careful selection process of who was put onto our panel. There were a couple of people on the panel who had previously been a part of these AI studies in colonoscopy. However, they were not allowed to vote at the end. They were able to discuss when we discussed the data, and we discussed the meta-analysis, and we discussed the microsimulation, but they were not allowed to vote in the final recommendations. Or really, it's a position statement from the ESGE. And what we ended up really deciding, Michael, and please step in here whenever you want to, is that we thought at the end of the day that our community and our patients really, or patients undergoing colonoscopy for screening or surveillance, adult patients undergoing colonoscopy for screening or surveillance, would want AI used based upon, even though it's a weak recommendation, there's weak and limited evidence that they would probably want AI there to assist the colonoscopist when they do the colonoscopy, because of the potential of greater adenoma detection, and potentially, as you've just discussed, the whole issue of later down the road reducing incidence of colorectal cancer, or potentially colorectal cancer-related mortality. And Michael, if you want to correct anything that I just said or add, please go ahead, because we really did this together as a collaboration for the ESGE.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I think this was very nicely explained, and I think it was an exciting project as the ESGE, because at the end, as you said, we had this big panel of people, and then we just voted, and everybody, because at the end it's always about values and preferences of the people who are on the panel. They are deciding on behalf of others, of everybody else. And we voted, and some people said, no, we don't believe AI is the thing that we recommend. Other people, the majority said, yes, it's small increments, but still we think that people would want it. And we landed there, a very democratic and transparent process, I think. I think it was very exciting to do that.
I agree, and it was not unanimous, as you just pointed out. There was not a huge majority, but there was a majority who thought that it would be helpful, and that it would be something, again, that patients undergoing colonoscopy for screen or surveillance would want AI there. But we make it very clear that the evidence is weak at this point. and for the reasons that Farid had pointed out earlier, very nicely pointed out.
Yeah. So before we hear at the end what the mothership at the BMJ and MAGIC thinks about all this, we're going over to America. Shazi, you have been leading the work at the AGA, and it's a very big organization. It's very influential. So please describe for us how you at AGA did this and what you landed on in the end.
Yeah, I also wanted to start with saying thank you for inviting me. This is such a wonderful opportunity. Yeah, so the really fortuitous aspect of this triple guideline effort was that at the time that BMJ was considering developing this guideline, we at the AGA had also gone through a priority topic selection process and had highlighted the importance of this topic as an area where our constituents, our members needed guidance, wanted guidance on what to do, especially as they were in positions to actively make decisions or engage with hospital leadership about purchasing CAD-E systems for their endoscopy units. So when Per and I met and talked about the opportunity to collaborate, we really recognize this as something unique because, as highlighted, the body of evidence is so robust for CAD-E and constantly evolving, changing, rapidly changing. And the amount of resources and effort that we were able to put towards developing this or co-developing the evidence base to support the recommendation really shows how you can reduce redundancy of effort in guideline development and really bring people together to be more efficient and timely with guideline recommendations. So we at the AGA were very much meeting alongside simultaneously as the BMJ panel was meeting and looking at the same evidence, looking at the same body of evidence on the randomized controlled trials, looking at the benefits and harms or desirable and undesirable effects of CAD-E. And we also were trying to look at additional sources of evidence around values and preferences. Ideally, you want actually a systematic review of values and preferences of patients undergoing CAD-E assisted colonoscopy. And we also recognize that this is a technology that is engaging with gastroenterologists. So if we were to make a recommendation for this, we would really want to make sure that the gastroenterologists were interested in using the technology and implementing it in their practice. So provider trust was also important, and we wanted to look at the evidence supporting that as well. So we talked a little bit about the critical outcomes of what the impact of CAD-E is in terms of colon cancer incidence and colon cancer-related mortality, as well as ADR, but we didn't really talk about some of the downsides or the undesirable effects of CAD-E. And that's important because really at the end of the day, you're looking at that trade-off, that net benefit to support your recommendation. And some of the undesirable effects that we saw from the randomized controlled trials, as well as, and primarily the modeling studies, we saw that there was really very little increase in complications of colonoscopy. So you detect more polyps, you do more polypectomy, there's complications related to polypectomy like bleeding and perforation. We didn't really see a big signal for this. And intuitively, that makes sense when you see how CAD-E is performing. It's helping to detect more polyps, but the polyps that maybe are being detected are smaller polyps or diminutive polyps, which if you remove with a biopsy forceps or a snare, very little complications associated with the removal of those smaller polyps. So that made sense. But what we also recognize that just by increasing the number of adenomas, you're actually risk stratifying people into more intense surveillance. So people that potentially would have had a 10-year follow-up surveillance recommendation might be asked to come back sooner, 5 years, 3 years. And so the overall burden associated with colonoscopy at a population level increased, and therefore resources associated with that. And also health-related anxiety. People being now told that they are potentially at higher risk of cancer and we need to undergo more frequent surveillance. So taking into account the net benefit, so the small, or trivial benefits and the concerns about the downsides of CAD-E, our panel looked at this trade-off, also looked at kind of the paucity of data on patients' values and preferences and the impact on resources and health equity, and came up with actually initially a recommendation 4 that after public comment period changed to a no recommendation, highlighting our uncertainty, highlighting the very low certainty we had about all the assumptions we were making around the true benefit that this might have. And so with a no benefit, with a no recommendation, which is a rare thing, we often try to avoid in the guideline world because we think that we are in the best position to make a recommendation. Providing no recommendation is not really providing much guidance for clinicians or patients. But in this case, we felt that a no recommendation made sense because of how unsure and how certain we were in some of the critical outcomes, the really limited data that we had about values and preferences from the patient perspective, and the fact that we felt that this is such an active space as we have more data, more evidence, and as Per alluded to, this is a living guideline that we wanted to continue to see innovation. We wanted to continue to see more studies, more trials being done that might help increase our certainty in the evidence that we have, and that might actually then allow us to make a different recommendation in the future.
Wow, this is cool. And I would personally, Thomas, I don't know what you think. I would personally applaud the courage at the AGA and your panel, Shahnaz. You had the courage to say, we don't know. We as experts, we are uncertain because, as you say, there is a small line between the benefits and the harms. And as you say, this is quite rare. So I applaud it. I mean, I was part of the ESGE panel. We landed on yes. You said, we don't know. Thomas, what do you think?
I love that because I hate this urge, this obsession to make a statement on everything, even without any evidence. But guys, I have to jump in between. I love cliffhangers. We are at the end of this podcast, but we have so much to discuss, so we are coming back with part 2. Thank you very much.